Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Welcome to Law Kept Simple. I am Stephanie Joy, sharing with you a little legal concept or legal definition, whatever else comes across the plate that some people are asking, what does that mean? Without having to do all the legal research themselves. It is simple, it is to the point. It doesn't make you a legal scholar, but it might just give you a understanding of the legal concept. So if you're in a conversation with somebody and don't want to look utterly foolish, you might have a little bit of knowledge in a very few minutes of time. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Well, Quinn, thank you for the opportunity. I'm just going to give you a little synopsis of what you would ask for about special counsel at the federal level and some of the basics around that when they typically want to do it, when it's supposed to be appropriate, and it's certainly not appropriate all the time. But so I just wanted to, and I have some notes here. Looking first at 28 CFR section 600, which is called grounds for appointing a special counsel. And I'm just going to go through that, and then I'm going to go through some other notes just to give some examples. So everyone here gets a little idea of what that is. And y'all can email me or message me through the DVT, and I'll try to clarify anything if it's unclear. So under section 600.1, it says the Attorney General, or in case in which the Attorney General is recused, that's a whole nother thing, the acting Attorney General will appoint a special counsel when he or she determines that criminal investigation of a person or matter is warranted. And two things, A and B. A, the first thing that they have to find is that the investigation or prosecution of that person, and we're just going to assume it's a person for the moment. It could also be a matter or litigation of other sorts. But for our purposes here, we're just going to say that investigation or prosecution of that person would present a conflict of interest for the department or other extraordinary circumstances. And this is also required then, that under the circumstances, it would be in the public interest to appoint an outside special counsel to assume responsibility for the matter. Thus, just to be clear, those things are required. So if it is not in the public's best interest overall to appoint a special counsel, one is not to be appointed. It can be, as we have seen in some years, arguably that appointment of a special counsel has been specifically against the public interest. So that's something that is actually in the code as a mandatory. Perhaps it has been not handled properly or whatever. And then, of course, would present a conflict of interest. Period. So what is a conflict of interest? Obviously, that would be a little important to know. So a couple of things. We know that a prosecutor's fundamental responsibility is to pursue the justice with fairness and impartiality. So a conflict can arise when a prosecutor's personal, financial, or professional interests, so it's generally one of those three, personal, financial, or professional interests would reasonably, not unreasonably, not a, teeny tiny speck of possibility, but reasonably appear to compromise their judgment. So it can't just even be that it exists in order for it to be a conflict, but that it must reasonably appear to compromise their judgment. So its mere existence is not necessarily going to do that. And that's because the situation, when that happens, it creates a risk that the decisions will be based on factors other than the evidence and the law, undermining the fairness of the legal process. We have seen that time and time again. Moving on, and I was going to just read something here that I had about the ABA, American Bar Association. They do provide standards to guide prosecutors in handling these situations to maintain public trust should they choose to use those guidelines. So going into so we said personal interest, financial interest, professional interest. Personal interest would be, for example, a family connection or a close friend with the defendant. Those are kind of obvious, right? It could also be a close friendship with the victim or any key witness. An example given by one legal group that likes to give explanations on how things are for lay people and for anybody just catching up. For instance, if you're the prosecutor and your cousin is a victim of a crime, is the victim of the crime, the prosecutors, your personal feelings could influence decisions about plea bargains or sentencing recommendations, etc. And because of that, there might not be entire objectivity, which is definitely required. Financial interests would also be potentially creating a conflict. And I say potentially, of course, it's not always. If a prosecutor has a financial stake in the outcome of a case, it's going to make him richer directly. And their impartiality is generally considered compromised. For example, they say if a prosecutor is owning stock in a corporation, which is under investigation for fraud, he could be influenced by how their decisions might affect their personal finances. People are always looking out for that bottom line, their back pocket or their bank account. And lastly, the professional relationships can also provide this. A prosecutor cannot handle a case against a defendant that they previously represented as a defense attorney. They had a previous professional relationship with that person defending them. Now they can't go and be on the other side. And this is because they tend to have, or could very easily have, information that is privileged, and that could be unfairly used against their former client, which does create an appearance of impropriety. And so that's where we get into where there's a difference between actual conflict, blatant, like some of the ones I just mentioned, or an appearance of impropriety. So they say that the law distinguishes between the two because an actual conflict is a clear situation where a prosecutor's personal interests are directly at odds with their professional duties. Directly. Again, financial, personal, professional. The example they give is a prosecutor has an actual conflict if they have financial stake in a company they are prosecuting, where a conviction would result in personal financial gain, or if a conviction would result in a loss to the prosecutor, he might be less likely to objectively prosecute that claim and go weak, as they say. An appearance of impropriety describes a situation that is not a provable conflict, but could cause a reasonable person to question the prosecutor's fairness. A reasonable person to question the prosecutor's fairness. So if an unreasonable person, based on their own biases, for instance, is going to question the prosecutor, that might not be considered to be a reasonable person questioning the prosecutor's fairness. And that's a really important point to make because I'm pretty sure you can often see people questioning a prosecutor's fairness solely because they themselves are biased in their own thinking about the whole situation. So they give an example. If a prosecutor is a close friend of a key witness, and I think it's obvious, the public might perceive a lack of objectivity. So he's a close friend of a key witness. That kind of pops up to those above personal relationships. And the courts do take it seriously because it can erode the public confidence in the justice system. This could be even if the prosecutor, so he's friends with a key witness, but he is not friends with the defendant or with the victim of the crime. So there's not a clear mandate, of course, that he's not going to do his job objectively. However, there might be an appearance of conflict because he is friends with the key witness on whichever side that is. And he could be completely honest and nothing would ever happen, but it's still an appearance. So, and when it is like that, it can be, if it rises to a significant enough level, it can rise to where the mere appearance of an impropriety based on something that specific can be grounds for the prosecutor's removal from the case. I'm not going to go into how they remove them because that's not really what we're talking about here. I know you guys just wanted to know what is the deal with conflicts of interest because we're hearing it in the news right now about whether or not there should be a special prosecutor. So I thought those two things were important to spell out, and I hope that gave you some clarity. And if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to email me at the DVT message board, okay? Or private email through there as well. All right, thanks guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.